Last on Everdark, the Thorns found out that everyone but them in House Ravenscroft is a vampire, including Julian and Christian. Everdark, Episode 51, Leaving Home. Damon stared at the Thorns. Of the two of them, the woman was stronger. She expressed more of the emotions she felt, but that allowed her to process them better. The man held his in. That made him more fragile. The man held the woman close. Tears streamed down her reddened face while his was a white mask.
Vampires aren't real,
Henry whispered, still denying the existence of what he knew was true. While his wife asked,
"How did this happen? Well, I want to know everything."
Mom, that's a long story.
Christian rubbed the back of his neck. He clearly wasn't sure where to begin a very difficult story to tell.
We should maybe eat something. Well, you guys should eat and have a drink, or...
2 or 10. I don't know if I want to be sober or so drunk that this all feels like a bad dream.
Elizabeth interrupted. One of the staff came and immediately filled her glass with champagne. She downed it and held out her glass for more. When Henry gave her a worried glance, she raised an eyebrow at him that seemed to ask, "I dare you to tell me not to have another drink after our son and his best friend came out as vampires." "There's quite a bit of prime rib and all the trimmings for dinner," Balthazar said diffidently.
Our favorite,
Elizabeth said softly, and let out a watery laugh as she downed the second glass of champagne. The staff member simply left a bottle in front of her.
Thank you, dear. You read my mind.
She paused.
Can you do that? I mean, your gang turned into wolves, so...
Ah, yes, well, our bloodline. Balthazar let out a faint laugh. Well, our bloodline's gift is one of mind control. Elizabeth's mouth fell open, and Henry's eyes seemed to bug out of his head. But she didn't do that with the champagne. That was just a guess, Balthazar assured them. But neither of them looked assured. Elizabeth turned to Christian.
Can you do that? Read my mind?
In theory, yes. But I'm not yet powerful enough to really do that. I have other gifts, he said.
What other?
Some can control minds, some can hear them, some can speak to the dead. Balthazar waved a hand as if the last was no never mind.
Speak to the dead?
Mom, don't worry about that. We need to start from the beginning.
Christian gave Balthazar a hard look.
Right, Balthazar?
Right, of course. Yes, must start at the beginning. Small steps, small words. Balthazar swung his arms back and forth at his sides. Realizing that everyone was staring at him, he lifted a silver tray and offered it to the Thorns. Canapes? Both waved them off, but this time Henry took a deep drink of champagne. Balthazar had impressed Damon by taking some of the heat off of the fledglings earlier. Iros, though, had always been the one to step up in the past to smooth feathers, so he probably shouldn't have been surprised. But Balthazar had taken a different tact this life, and had a more laconic, jaded perception of the world. After his experience with Roan and the lack of action by his fellow vampires, especially the Masters, Damon likely shouldn't have been surprised by this either.
Do you eat any more?
Elizabeth asked them all. We can, Balthazar answered with a shrug. But there is no hunger for it, just the pleasure of tasting remembered favorite foods.
So, no more need to buy those chocolate chunk cookies you like any longer, Christian.
Her voice thickened with tears. Christian tensed.
That's not true, Mom. He just said that we can eat if we want to. We just don't have to. So I still want the cookies. I'm still me.
And it was this last line that really answered her concern. It was not cookies, Damon realized, but whether Christian was still her son that haunted her. She was sensible enough not to believe his favorite foods were who he was. Still, it was interesting to see the connections that these mortals had between who a person was and their favorite things. Well, dinner will be served in half an hour, but there are plenty of finger foods for everyone, Balthazar said and gestured towards the appetizing foods that the staff was circulating.
Look, see, the others are eating them too. Let's sit and talk. Really talk,
Christian said, as he grabbed a garlic toast and stuffed it into his mouth, likely without tasting it, but to make a point.
You can eat garlic,
Henry asked.
Yeah,
Christian said through a mouthful of garlic cheese toast. Garlic, crosses, holy water, and all of that are myths. Sunlight isn't, though. We have to avoid it assiduously. And we do. Drink human blood. Balthazar listed out on his fingers. So people got some of it right. Most of the important bits. Glad they got our weaknesses mostly wrong, really.
The boys drink human blood?
Henry suddenly put down his champagne.
Well, actually, we have to drink from our masters,
Julian said. But the word masters seemed to alarm even more.
Master means the vampire who shared their blood with us first. That's how you're turned.
Julian quickly explained.
It doesn't mean like slave and master or something like that.
Damon smiled at him. To some masters it did. But his brave Julian would never be a slave, not even to him. Balthazar loved Christian too much to ever do that to him either.
You call him master?
Elizabeth pointed to Damon.
No, I call him Damon,
Julian said, and bit back other words. You call me king, too.
You only wish I did,
Julian retorted. I am your king, Damon said firmly.
Well, they wouldn't understand that,
Julian protested. I think they would. But you are afraid of their reaction. Hiding the truth from them now will not make things easier later, Damon warned him.
They have enough to deal with,
Julian said, but his fledgling looked wretched. He was clutching onto Christian's arm as if he feared the thorns would wrench Christian away from him. Outside of their conversation, Julian's thoughts were cascading wildly, but the main thread that Damon picked out was this. I am responsible. I was the one that pulled Christian into my hunt for vampires. He only came to the city because of me. I doubt they will forgive me for this, let alone all of the rest of it. Damon reached out to Julian's mind to calm him. Christian came of his own accord, my fledgling. He would never have let you go alone to Nightvallen. You would never have given up your quest for knowledge about what happened to your beloved parents. And all of this was fate. You were meant to come to me, remember? He saw Julian's shoulders relax slightly, but his fledgling was still worried. Julian reached over to the white wolf that was the leader of the pack and contained most of his mind. Damon loped immediately to him. Julian held the wolf close, kissing the side of its head and stroking the soft fur. The wolf's eyes closed in pleasure.
Why is that man, your king, still in his wolf or wolf's form? Can't he turn back? It's just a little disconcerting to have 100 wolves with red eyes staring at us,
Elizabeth said. Julian quickly released the wolf's neck at a mental nudge from Damon. The white wolf moved to a clear space in the living room. The other wolves converged upon him, and his humanoid form was reborn, with his long wolf coat, and nothing else. He turned to face the group. He opened his arms to Julian, who immediately came towards him, giving him a half smile and let out a laugh.
I forgot that shape-shifting is hell on clothes.
Julian snickered. It was good to see him laugh. The Thorns seemed to live up to their name. They pricked Julian, and he did not like it. But Julian cared for them and their opinions. He was not so sure that it was wise for Julian to cling to these mortals. Damon looked down at his nude body. Is this form not pleasing?
You are very pleasing,
Julian assured him. He looked back at Henry and Elizabeth. The Thorns were staring at him with red cheeks.
It's just, you're a little distracting.
Damon recalled this type of behavior had happened when he'd prayed nude before. He shrugged. I do enjoy the new clothing. I will wear more of it, if required. Could someone go get our king some pants? And perhaps a shirt? Shoes and socks, too, Balthazar said to the members of House Ravenscroft.
I'll do it,
William called, and immediately ran off into the depths of the manor.
Let's join the others.
Julian started to lead him to the couches. Sit with Christian. I am content to stand until I have my clothing, Damon said.
All right.
Julian petted his arm and kissed his cheek before going back to Christian. Do you get a new wolf coat each time you transform back to your human form from your wolf forms? And where do your clothes go? All the Warren bloodline vampires I know always strip before they shift, but I've never seen them come back with anything on.
Balthazar, now is not the time to satisfy your curiosity.
Christian said with a shake of his head, even as he tugged at the vampire lord's arm. But come on. You must wonder about it too. Elizabeth, Henry, clothes that disappear and other clothes that reappear are fascinating, don't you think? Balthazar gestured to the Thorns.
It is strange, to be sure, but I'm wondering more about the mass issue.
Henry murmured.
How does one man become 100 wolves? The clothes seem superfluous in comparison to that.
Balthazar tapped his chin, considering this. True. But the shifting mass just seems magical. The clothes are weird. I mean, really weird. I have one coat. Damon ran his hands along the fur.
But the coat was in the closet.
Julian was frowning now. And now it is here, Damon answered. Christian blinked.
So, the coat magically teleports to wherever you are?
It comes to me, Damon said with a touch of amusement. Teleporting coats. That's a new gift, Balthazar muttered. He then called to Arceus. That isn't in the order's texts. Imagine if you could just will your clothes to you. Screw dressing. I feel deprived. I want that power too.
You are not king.
Arceus chuckled. His bearded face was struggling not to settle into a grin. So are there other things you can do that the other immortals can't, Damon? Other than the Armageddon thing? Balthazar asked, looking at him narrowly.
While this is fascinating, we need to talk about Christian and Julian.
Elizabeth reminded Balthazar with a raised eyebrow. Oh, yes, of course. It's just Damon's sort of new to all of us, Balthazar admitted as he ran a hand over the top of his head. See, as new as all of this is to you, there's a lot of new to us. Your boys have pretty much upset the vampire's view of things by kissing Sleeping Beauty over there.
If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or other dedicated listening platforms, and you want to say hi, head on over to the YouTube channel. We love to hear directly from you. Otherwise, we have no idea who's out there listening. It really means a lot. If you don't want to comment on specific episodes, we also run polls and discussions in our YouTube community tab all the time with deep topics such as, do you have pets? And what's your favorite vampire movie? Just search for Everdark YouTube or follow the link in the notes to connect with us.
I was not asleep. Not exactly, Damon corrected. He didn't say he wasn't a beauty, which had Balthazar snickering.
Your view of things, Balthazar.
Arceus crossed his arms over his chest.
Some of us always believed in Damon and the Immortals.
Yes, but not even you, Arceus, knew about the coat teleportation. And I'm sure there's more. Balthazar wagged his finger at Damon. You're holding out on us. Yes, Damon answered simply, playing along with Balthazar, whose game was very clear to him. Lighten the mood, so that the Thorns could hear what they had to say when they were less emotionally distressed. Already Julian was relaxing even further as Balthazar teased and taunted and went off on tangents. I like to keep you guessing, Balthazar. Oh, you have. But I'll get it all out of you. You'll see. Balthazar grinned at him, and a message was received. Now, let's sit and answer the Thorns' question, as I'm sure they have quite a few. Maybe we can get this all settled before dinner. Doubtful, my Iros. Henry and Elizabeth seated themselves on the love seat. Julian and Christian took the main couch, while Balthazar sat on the opposite love seat with Arceus. Like he had said to Julian, Damon remained standing. He wanted to keep an eye on Julian at all times and observe the others. Sitting would impede this. He noticed that Elizabeth's eyes kept tracking him, dropping down his form, then quickly skittering back again with hot spots of color on her cheeks. She yanked her gaze away from him at last and looked over at Christian and Julian instead.
So please tell us what happened and what this all means.
Julian tented his hands in front of his face and rested his elbows on his knees.
Okay, so you guys know about how my parents theorized about another world where vampires reside, and that there are gates between here and that world?
Both of the Thorns nodded. Julian continued.
Well, it's all true. There's another world, A place called the Everdark, with 2 moons and endless forests, and vampires exist there. It's amazing. The vampires cross back and forth through the gates, just like my parents said. They found a gate that took them to a city called Nightfallen, Damon City.
Julian pointed to him as Damon drifted to the mantel. Henry was staring at the boys minutely, and only glanced at Damon once. He clearly was looking for differences in them. They would be visible for anyone to see who had known the boys before they had been turned. Damon could remember Julian only vaguely through the mists of hunger and the spell that had kept him in the wakeless state. As the boys spoke to the Thorns, outlining everything for them, Damon imagined what it would have been like, should have been like, if Christian and Julian's turnings had been planned. They should have been joyous occasions where all vampire kind rejoiced. Instead, he had left Julian alone to face the world. Dissatisfaction flowed through him. Having to now convince these Thorns that the turning of these beautiful young men into practical gods was a good thing just added insult to injury. When the boys had stopped speaking, Elizabeth and Henry were silent for long moments. The only sounds in the rooms were the fire crackling, the champagne bubbling, and the hearts of 2 humans beating. Otherwise, all the vampires were utterly silent. Each member of House Ravenscroft had listened intently to every word. The whole story had not been told to them before, and they waited on every word.
This only happened to Christian because of me,
Julian said, his hands tangling together in his laps. He twisted and tugged at them in his anxiety.
I don't know if you can forgive me. I don't know if I can forgive myself.
Christian put an arm around his shoulders.
Do you regret becoming a vampire?
Julian was shaking his head and glancing up at Damon to make sure that he knew that Julian didn't regret a thing.
All I can think about is the fact that we'll have more time to do all the things we want to do, to learn all the things we want to learn. And there's so much more than we ever understood out there.
Julian answered.
Why do you think I feel any differently than you do?
Christian asked him.
Between the 2 of us, I'm more the scientist and you're more the adventurer. This whole thing is like being part of a science experiment.
But it's not an experiment that will ever end.
Henry said dully.
You can't go back to being what you were, can you?
Why would they want to? To be fragile and mortal like you? Ridiculous. As if he would choose you over me. Balthazar confirmed Henry's statement. I'm afraid it's a one-way ticket, though it must be hard to accept. There was only one choice for the boys to make. To die, or live forever. It's not really a choice at all. Elizabeth lifted her head. She had been staring down at her hands for most of the story.
So the boys died.
Elizabeth's voice was soft and her gaze distant.
And we didn't even know. Well, they say a mother knows things, but I had no idea. I was worried when they didn't answer their phones, but I had no idea.
Christian immediately got up and went to his mother. He kneeled down in front of her and tried to take her hands, but she drew them back before extending them to him again. A flash of pain went through Christian's silver eyes, but he quickly hid it. When he spoke, his voice was gentle.
We're not dead, Mom.
He squeezed her hands in his.
Feel my hands. They're warm. I have a heartbeat. Julian and I are still here. Faster, stronger, forever young, and with gifts. Magical gifts. You of all people should be excited by this, Mom.
My son could never do anything magical, but you can,
she said.
Mom, I'm your son, and I can do amazing things. I want to show you.
Christian begged her.
But they are your parents now, not us.
She gestured towards Damon and Balthazar.
They brought you into this world through their blood. They have you now, not us.
Yes, we do have them. They are ours, not yours. Never yours anymore.
Balthazar isn't a parent. I love him, but not like I love you and Dad. Really, not how I love you and Dad.
Christian gave her an uncertain smile.
If you understand what I'm saying.
So, he is your lover as well as your master.
Her gaze sharpened on Balthazar, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but pretended to just be fixing his coat.
And how will that work when your relationship ends?
Our relationship will never end, Balthazar said firmly.
How long have you been alive, Balthazar?
She asked. Over 200 years, he answered her. But there was that slightly guilty pause, because he knew he had lived before. She turned her gaze on Damon.
And how old are you?
Damon did not answer her, but pointed out, "What you are really asking is what happens if their romantic relationship ends. You think since he is over 200 years old he should be more sensible that such things happen all the time. But a parent's love is eternal, yes?"
Yes, exactly.
She said as she regarded him thoughtfully. She turned to Balthazar.
You have ushered my son into this dark world and into your bed, evidently. How can I trust you with my son when you have shown such poor judgment?
Balthazar's mouth dropped open, and no words came out. Damon's eyes narrowed. Did she think that a master's love for his fledgling was something that could be broken by physical love? It was ridiculous.
Mom, he's not David,
Christian said tightly. He stood up, and tremors ran through him.
Balthazar is the exact opposite of David. I know you're trying to protect me, but you're not understanding things.
Damon was impressed that the young man pushed back against this line of argument. It was one that clearly was steeped in old wounds and had a power outsized to what it should.
An older man with power over you takes you as his lover. That isn't David,
she asked.
This relationship could lead to disaster. It will lead to disaster. He should know that after 200 years, things don't last forever, especially romantic relationships.
Before Balthazar turned me, he asked me what I wanted. I knew that I was choosing to become a vampire, and I certainly knew what I was choosing when I went to bed with him.
Christian said firmly.
This was not something I did lightly. I know I made a mistake with David, and I realize that this makes you doubt my judgment, but...
No, honey. David was not your fault, and this is not your fault. You were put into an impossible position where you had to make a life or death decision, and you made it. And I'm glad you chose life, though I'm afraid what kind of life this is.
Elizabeth rose up from her chair. Damon felt the wave of pain go through his fledgling. He almost wanted to double over from it himself. For his fledgling, this was the worst nightmare.
Well, I wasn't put in an impossible situation. Julian was.
Christian shook his head.
You know when he took Damon's blood that he believed he was going to die a terrible death? But he did it anyway to save me, to give me the chance to go on.
Julian stood up.
Christian, no.
We don't blame Julian.
Henry cried.
We don't. He downplayed what he went through, but can you imagine choosing death?
Christian was shaking. Julian put his hands on Christian's shoulders.
And not a quick and easy death, but a terrible, painful one, where he would be alone.
And you were alone, because of me, Damon thought.
You came for me.
Julian told him. I should never have let you go. I will never let you go. Julian cast him a grateful look. But then he was saying to his best friend,
I brought you to Night Fallen in the first place, Christian. It was my obsession that did this. I never would have let you go alone. And you had to go. We both had to know what happened to your parents.
Christian objected.
We don't blame you, Julian. That's not what I meant. I just don't know these people, and I cannot trust you with them.
Elizabeth cried. Henry stood and wrapped his arms around her.
What about this person who killed Julian's parents? You mentioned that he is the head of some religious order, and that he still intends to kill you and us and everyone else in here.
Henry gestured to the whole room.
What are we going to do about him?
It is not him that we should be concerned about. It is Callie behind all of this, with the Order being used as their puppet. Damon finally spoke. I will deal with Callie and the Order.
That hardly reassures me. From what the boys have said, you're not human. You've never been human. Julian is the first fledgling you've ever had. How can he matter so much to you that you will protect him?
Henry asked. Julian must have felt his emotions before they even fully registered with Damon himself, because he was immediately moving towards Damon as those words were uttered. Damon had not realized he had pushed off of the mantle. Henry was no physical threat to him, but his words were like a dagger in Damon's heart. You do not know what you say. Damon growled at him. Julian was grasping hold of the wolf coat.
He doesn't understand, Damon. He doesn't realize what the connection is between a master and a fledgling. He doesn't know what you've gone through trying to find someone who could become your fledgling. He can't imagine the bond that's between us. Humans don't have this kind of bond.
Damon's gaze swung over the group. They landed on Elizabeth and Henry, who looked so longingly and anxiously at Julian. They wanted to snatch Julian back from him. They wanted to take Julian away. They fear they are no longer connected to you and Christian, Damon said.
Exactly. And that's just a fear.
Perhaps that should be true, Damon said coolly. Julian blinked.
What?
Christian frowned.
These are my parents.
As Elizabeth said, you have new parents now. I do not believe your old ones will help you adjust to your new second lives, Damon said. They do not accept who and what you are. For this, it would be best that they go. At that moment, William returned with clothes for Damon and said brightly,
Dinner is served.
Join us next time for episode 52, an additional dinner guest.
Buying something from our shop is a great way to support the Everdark podcast, as well as our future podcasts once Everdark is finished. Our designer has created some great Everdark merch, such as the Vampire Bloodlines hoodies, mugs, and journals done in a college-type design. Check out the link in the notes to our shop. This way you can support Everdark and wear your vampire bloodline with pride.
The Everdark podcast by Ex Aratare is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Jay Thillis, Bruno Devant, Kelly Michaels, and Hannah Hart, with Liz Gentle as Seer. Edited by Matthew Prince, continuity by Adrielle Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.